One of my pet peeves is that my generation certainly got sidetracked by the hot button issues. And it reached a point where, for a lot of people, that's all they knew about Catholicism, was that we took stands, against divorce and remarriage, against homosexuality, etc. And that you can get at the hot button issues only through the discipline of the life of the church. That first you should get involved in all of that, you should apprentice to that, and then you'll grasp it more from the inside. The trouble is that we often started with the hot button issues, or for many people, we get stuck on the hot button issues. So that's the first recommendation I'd make, is begin with the more fundamental things, and then be drawn into the life of the church, and there you'll begin to understand what they're about. St. Thomas Aquinas is buried at the Dominican Church of the Jacobins in Toulouse, and Thomas is my personal hero, really. When I was 14 years old, I went to Fenwick High School, a Dominican high school near Chicago, and one of the young priests taught us the arguments for God's existence from Thomas Aquinas. And I'm still not sure exactly why this happened, but it was like a bell went off in me. There was a sense I got of the reality of God, which I've never lost. And hearing those proofs many years ago set me on a path I've never really gotten off of. Those proofs many years ago set me on a path. I'm a priest because of the grace of God. But that grace really, for me, came through Thomas Aquinas. So it was a privilege to thank him there in Toulouse. It also occurred to me that Thomas is such an important figure for our own time. You wonder, why would this 13th century theological master be so important for the 21st century? Thomas Aquinas saw with utter clarity that truth is one, since all truth finally comes from the one God, who is truth itself. Therefore, there can never be a conflict between the truths of science and the truths of faith. During his own time in the 13th century in Paris, where he taught, there was a group that advocated the double truth theory, which said, well, there are two sets of truths. There are religious truths and there are philosophical or scientific truths. And they might be at odds with each other, they might be in contradiction, but you have to sequester. One is philosophical, the other is religious, and they can exist, even contradictory truths, side by side. Well, Thomas Aquinas thought that was so much nonsense and said so, and that advocated the double truth theory, which said, well, there are two sets of truths, and they can exist, even contradictory truths, side by side. Well, Thomas Aquinas thought that was so much nonsense. And we also allow science to be disciplined by what we know to be the case from Revelation. Science to be disciplined, reach out to the sciences. We reverence the sciences. We take with great seriousness what the sciences teach. Science to be disciplined, contradictory truths, side by side. These really deep truths that emerge out of Revelation cannot be contradicted by the sciences. Hearing those proofs many years ago set me on a path I've never really gotten off of. The greatest theological masterpiece in our tradition, namely the Summa Theologiae of Thomas Aquinas. The massive second part of the Summa deals with what we call today ethics, or morality, right? The question of how do you live your life? Thomas Aquinas is a bit like the Sherlock Holmes of theology. What I mean is, think of how we would ordinarily look at someone and we come to certain conclusions. Sherlock Holmes saw with such insight that he could come to all kinds of correct conclusions simply on the basis of examination. Before the person ever spoke, Sherlock Holmes could determine a lot about them, right? Greatest theological masterpiece in our tradition, namely the Summa Theologiae of Thomas Aquinas. The massive second part of the Summa deals with what we call today ethics, or morality, right? The question of how do you live your life? Thomas Aquinas, he can determine all kinds of things about God on the basis of reason alone. But Thomas Aquinas was very impressed by the fact that contingent things, that's to say, things that don't contain within themselves the reason for their own existence, exist. And that's a puzzle. That's a mystery. Contingent things like you and me, if we eat and drink, if we had parents, if we breathe air, we're contingent. We don't explain our own existence. Plants, trees, animals, human beings, the cosmos itself are contingent. Therefore, the fact that they exist needs to be explained, Aquinas intuited. Furthermore, An infinite appeal to other conditioned things, other contingent things, will never be adequate. It simply postpones the explanation. We must come, therefore, Aquinas saw, to some reality which exists through the power of its own essence. That's what Catholics call God.
The existence of God can be proved in 5 ways. The first and more manifest way is the argument from motion. It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Whatever is in motion is put in motion by another, whereas a thing moves inasmuch as it is in act. For motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. But nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. It is therefore impossible that, in the same respect and in the same way, a thing should be both mover and moved. That is, that it should move itself. Therefore, whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. If that by which it is put in motion be itself put in motion, then this also must needs be put in motion by another, and that by another again. But this cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover, and consequently no other mover, seeing that subsequent movers move only inasmuch as they are put in motion by the first mover, as the staff moves only because it is put in motion by the hand. Therefore, it is necessary to arrive at a first mover, put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God.
That's how he argued for God's existence on rational grounds.
On rational grounds.
He was very moved by the coherence between that view of God and the self-revelation in Exodus 3:14, when Moses asked God for his name. The coherence, and it was the rational ground for confirming God's existence.
That the inferior sciences neither prove their principles nor dispute with those who deny them, but leave this to a higher science. Whereas the highest of them, namely metaphysics, can dispute with one who denies its principles, if only the opponent will make some concession.
And God said, I am who I am. I'm not a particular being. I'm not one contingent thing among many. I'm the sheer act of existence itself. Thomas saw that, and it was the rational ground for confirming God's existence.
God said, I am who I am. I'm not a particular being.
Because God is not a being. But, one of the deepest truths about God is that God is a person, right? God is paradigmatically a person. He's the ground of all personhood. He's the supreme person. Now, philosophy can shed some light on God so construed, and I've just done that. What we come to finally is some reality that is radically other than the universe. God is not one reality among many. God is not a force within the observable, measurable cosmos. So it's quite right to say science qua science is not going to find God. Think of that famous cosmonaut who went up into outer space back in the late 50s. I'm up here in the heavens, he said, and there's no God. Well, come on. No one thinks God is a being you're going to find or a force you're going to find within the universe, which could even be in principle measured by the sciences. Now there's my point. I've got to make that decision. Do I believe her or not? Do I trust her or not? Is this good? Yes. The Catholic tradition says authentic faith never involves a sacrificium intellectus, Latin for a sacrifice of the intellect. In fact, one of the signs that you're not dealing with authentic faith is that you've had to sacrifice your mind. See, now I would characterize that as a fundamentalism or a fideism, to use the technical term. In the Catholic tradition, we say, if you are sacrificing your intellect in any way, you're not dealing with authentic faith. Faith is this surrender that lies beyond reason. That you've seen what you can, you've understood what you can, but now you surrender to something that is beyond your control. And the most delicious moments in life are like that, aren't they? I mean, when you fall in love, when you love a piece of art, when you listen to a piece of music that moves you very deeply, you're not analytically controlling every aspect of it. You're allowing that piece of music to move you. It's moving. It's affecting me. That means I've surrendered to its power. It doesn't make me stupid or superstitious or irrational. We have to explain, therefore, why it's in this configuration. It's not
self-explanatorily in this configuration. I have to appeal to an extrinsic cause. The same is true of energy. That's a more contemporary term. The same problem. Energy is in some state, as the staff moves only because it is put in motion by the hand. Some configuration, some manner of being. It could be another. Therefore, I have to invoke an extrinsic cause to explain why it's this case rather than that. To appeal to the endlessly fluctuating or expanding or contracting
universe as a whole is just as much of a non-starter. Why? Because it's simply that problem now writ large.
Why is the universe expanding rather than contracting? Why is it contracting rather than expanding? Why is the fluctuating vacuum, I'll use that term sometimes, in this state of fluctuation rather than that? To appeal to matter or energy is to appeal to something that's by its very nature contingent. What we have to come to finally is some reality that is radically other than the universe, which could even be in principle measured by the sciences.
It doesn't make me stupid or superstitious or irrational.
If you doubt me, take a look at the first part of the great Summa Theologiae of Thomas Aquinas.
Are there ways of talking about God rationally? Sure. You know, God's the first cause, unmoved mover, the ground of intelligibility, the source, the Sherlock Holmes of theology. What I mean is, think of how we would ordinarily look at someone and we come to certain conclusions. Sherlock Holmes saw with such insight that he could come to all kinds of correct conclusions simply on the basis of examination. Before the person ever spoke, Sherlock Holmes could determine a lot about them, right? So Thomas Aquinas is the Sherlock Holmes of theology. He can determine all kinds of things about God on the basis of reason alone.
Hearing those proofs many years ago set me on a path I've never really gotten off of.
I'm supposed to be the avatar of medieval superstition. I'm supposed to be the one defending old pre-scientific views of the world. And yet, faith is this surrender that lies beyond reason. That you've seen what you can, you've understood what you can, but now you surrender to something that is beyond your control. And the most delicious moments in life are like that, aren't they? I mean, when you fall in love, when you love a piece of art, when you listen to a piece of music that moves you very deeply, you're not analytically controlling every aspect of it. Yet it seems to take a greater leap of faith to say there's a God than...
We have to explain, therefore, why it's in this configuration. It's not self-explanatorily in this configuration. I have to appeal to an extrinsic cause. The same is true of energy. That's a more contemporary term. The same problem. Energy is in some state, some configuration, some manner of being. It could be another. Therefore, I have to invoke an extrinsic cause to explain why it's this case rather than that. To appeal to the endlessly fluctuating or expanding or contracting universe as a whole is just as much of a non-starter.
Analytically controlling every aspect of it, which is properly unlimited in its being. What it can't be is some finite and finally contingent force within the universe.
Gravity is indeed an impressive law, an impressive force, an impressive power. But gravity is finite. Gravity is variable. Gravity in itself is not that which exists in the power of its own essence.
And it's ludicrous to suggest that anything like it within the universe is itself the cause of the being of the universe.
And it's ludicrous to suggest that anything like it within the universe is itself the cause of the being of the universe.
Analytically controlling every aspect of it. Here's what the author said. In his new book, The Grand Design, Hawking sets out a comprehensive thesis that the scientific framework leaves no room for a deity. And I'm sure which is properly unlimited in its being. What it can't be is some finite and finally contingent force within the universe. He meant that to imply that science proves there's no God. But see, I would say that's quite right. The scientific framework means that epistemological purview that takes in the world of our experience, the world that we can measure, that we can observe. It is indeed right to say, within that framework, I'm not going to find a deity. Why?
We have to explain, therefore, why it's in this configuration.
Very nature is to be, to exist. It must therefore be the fullness of existence. It must therefore...
Nothing but existence. And now again you see why we identify it with God. It must be that which is properly unlimited in its being. Nothing but existence. And now again you see why it must be that which is properly unlimited in its being.
Now, the implication is each human person is irreducibly dignified. Each human person is the subject of an enormous God-given set of rights. Abortion, euthanasia, stem cell research, all those things that would reduce human beings to a means to an end are repugnant to this fundamental Christian claim about the dignity of the human being. Thomas Aquinas knew that, as all the great Christian theologians know. And that makes him, I think, extraordinarily relevant to our own time. And so going back to that tomb of Aquinas, I think of his bones are in that casket in Toulouse. But thank God his spirit and his mind live on provocatively in the life of the church now.